Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and I have a passion for empowering others to take responsibility for their careers. Yes, I've written several books on owning your career and am loving hosting this podcast. This podcast is for you if you're willing to make a shift to the driver's seat in your career. We feature leaders who inspire, empower, and motivate you for consistent career action for results. Please continue to join us every Sunday when a new episode is released. Let's get into this week's show. Hello, it's Simone Morris, host of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. First and foremost, I want to say thank you for being a loyal listener of the show. We are in season 11. I can't believe it. I still enjoy recording episodes, and I still enjoy getting to know leaders and having conversations behind the scenes. And I enjoy sharing this knowledge with you because I know that it's helping you with your career. If you just take one thing from each episode, you will have a huge list of things that you can apply to advance in your career. So that gives me a lot of joy. What's Simone working on? Right now, I'm working on a children's book, which I will say more about later. I'm working on it with my daughter. Very passionate about that. And I'm also working on something called the Inclusive Leadership Impact Awards. That is near and dear to my heart because it's something that I've been wanting to do for a while. I don't know about you, and if you remember the first award that you got in your career, but it's quite memorable. And it recognizes brilliance. It recognizes your hard work. And I want to recognize the change makers who are pushing for more inclusion in the community, in the workplace, in the world. And so I came up with the Inclusive Leadership Impact Awards, and the inaugural program is going live at an event on November 2nd, 2023. It's going to be at the Carriage Barn Arts Center in New Canaan, Connecticut from 4 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. I'm excited because we've gotten nominations completed. The judges are ready to deliberate, and then we will celebrate the winners, as I said, on November 2nd. I would love your support on this event. I mean, talk about it on LinkedIn, share it with your network, attend the event. You can purchase a ticket. The event information is available at ILI, so that's Inclusive Leadership Impact, ILIawards.com. Please take a look at that website, learn more about it, and again, would love your support. I am planning on doing more Real Talk episodes this season. Mostly I have been behind the scenes, but I want you to know that I am planning on doing a Real Talk episode real soon so you can hear just Simone's voice and what's on my mind in terms of advancing and being in the driver's seat in your career. So again, thank you for listening. Let's get ready for today's guest. Hello, everyone. This is Simone Morris, the host of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm happy to be with you today. Today, you're in for a treat. It is a Real Talk episode. No guest today, just Simone sharing some wisdom. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is making time to work on your career. Sometimes in life, we get busy and we don't have time to work on our careers. I want to stress to you the priority or the importance of making professional development a priority for your career. It's important because if you don't make the time to work on your career becomes less of a priority, or it means that you're not as intentional as you could be about your career direction. And I want that for you. Believe me, I speak from experience, having taken my hands off the wheels in my career and leaving things to chances. And what I mean by that is a allowing others to dictate the journey of my career. So what that could look like for you is someone else indicating to you what are good career choices for you. And if you don't spend the time really getting clear on your vision, your North Star for your career, then you can easily be derailed. And it doesn't mean that you won't achieve your career goals. It just means that it can take you a lot longer to achieve your career goals. The other thing on my mind this week is really the fabulous late David Kim. I met David Kim at my old company. He was a part of a multicultural advisory group, and he just had this warm presence about him. He was very likable, and I remember leaving the company that I worked at, and he stayed connected with me. He was always warm and welcoming when I sent him emails asking for his help. I honestly, the best rejection I've ever gotten is from him. I asked him to be on advisory board for my company, and he didn't say no. I mean, he wasn't able to do it at the time, so he just said, not right now. And I think in the midst of hearing so many no's, it's always nice when somebody is nice and kind about their no's. And David was that type of person. I was absolutely floored when I learned that he passed away. I had no idea he was sick. And I just saw a post on LinkedIn one day that said that he was no longer in the physical realm. And I remember being very disturbed by that, because I don't know if I told David how important and how much I admired him. I really enjoyed our conversation. And so today I pulled out the book, The Power of Owning Your Career, because I interviewed David Kim in The Power of Owning Your Career. And I remember he was such a gentleman with sharing his career story. I enjoyed listening to it. I probably have the tape somewhere where I can go back and listen to David's interview, because it was so special to me. And I would love to share with you today a reading of the David Kim interview and his chapter in The Power of Owning Your Career book, because this book was so instrumental to me. It was an opportunity for me to take time and reflect back on how I got from the passenger seat to the driver's seat in my career. And I enjoyed interviewing 14 leaders to help to ask them to share their story with me. And David Kim was one of them. So and the other thing is, I recently found a recommendation on Alignable from David Kim. And so just a great human being who is dearly missed, and humble, but an amazing leader who I took so much from the relationship that I had with him. I took note on how he approached things and his commentary, and I wanted to do a tribute to him because he definitely was in the driver's seat for his career and an inspirational leader. All right, I want to read what I have said. This is on page 72 in the book, The Power of Owning Your Career podcast. And David Kim was the founder and CEO of Iambic Group, LLC. I had the pleasure of meeting David during my tenure at Diageo. He was a part of the Diageo Multicultural Marketing Advisory Group. I had exposure to the group because of my role in leading the African heritage employees at Diageo. I jokingly think of David as E.F. Hutton. That means when he speaks, you listen. He was always very nice to me. He genuinely listened to me and made me feel welcome. When you have those experiences, you don't forget them wherever you go. So it goes without saying that I stayed in touch with David after my time at Diageo ended. He is someone, or he was someone, to be admired and learned from. It was a no-brainer for me to include him in the power of owning your career. I know with certainty that you'll enjoy his story and pick up some valuable inspirational knowledge along the way. Here's David's story. I am a first-generation American of Korean descent. My parents immigrated to the United States in the mid-50s after the Korean War. I was born in New Jersey and grew up in the United States. Over my career, I have had the good fortune of gaining experience in the media, corporate, government, and nonprofit sectors, domestically and internationally. I was the inaugural editor of the Asian American Journalists Association convention newspaper called The Daily Agenda. This was in 1990, and it was a fun project. It was the first time that any minority journalist association desktop published the convention newspaper. It was a great management experience. I picked the editorial staff, production team, and I oversaw several section editors and layout editors, as well as set up the daily editorial briefing and assignment meetings. And ultimately, I was responsible for making sure the paper not only was delivered, but that the quality of the paper was beyond reproach. It was an incredibly exhausting week, which could have been a nightmare if I hadn't picked the right people, get them all on the same page, and inspire them to do whatever it took to get the job done. Clarity of purpose, responsibilities, and expectations had to come from me. Without alignment and understanding, no matter how great the people were, this would not have been a success. One of the AAJA convention attendees I met was a corporate relations manager from Anheuser-Busch. We exchanged pleasantries, but it was more of a chance meeting than anything else. The next thing I knew, I was asked to consider being interviewed for a position with Anheuser-Busch, and this was interesting because up until that time, I was pretty much on an academically oriented career path. I had already interviewed and accepted a job at the Asia Society to head the Korean Affairs desk. When the call came from Anheuser-Busch in the space of a week, I got plane tickets, flew out, had my job interview, and received a job offer on the Friday before the Monday I was supposed to start my new job. That was a little bit awkward. I accepted the Anheuser-Busch job and apologized profusely to the Asia Society. The person who hired me actually became a really good friend of mine, and I returned the favor to him by speaking at one of his conferences in Chicago years later, free. I owed him a favor, and he was gracious to allow me to repay the favor in that regard. I thought I had burned a bridge, but handling the situation the way that I did allowed me to not only keep my reputation intact, but also by not forgetting the kindness shown to me. I was able to turn a potentially negative into a positive that still exists today. The first part of my career with Anheuser-Busch, where I spent nearly 15 years, started out in New York City, and then a year later, I started in St. Louis, where their corporate headquarters are located. That's where I gained a significant part of my formative education, if you will, business education. Working for a large corporation, getting a sense of what I was good at, the importance of establishing relationships, having an impact, and knowing the difference between output and outcomes. Another key learning was understanding how to succeed in a matrixed environment and the value of creating and exercising virtual influence and management. Taking that experience and applying it to the positions I had later on was very helpful. After Anheuser-Busch, I received an appointment to become the chief of staff at the United States Mint. That was my first foray into the C-suite. It was a very interesting situation because the director of United States Mint was of Chinese descent. This was my first time that I directly reported to another Asian. I enjoyed my experience there, though it was crazy at times. I gained valuable insights into how the federal government works and at times doesn't work. I absolutely appreciated the opportunity to serve our country. Also, it is interesting to note that prior to my time at the US Mint, I had only reported to African Americans and Latinos. Following that, I joined for a short time a boutique public affairs firm called the Rabin Group. Then I was with AARP to start the Asian American Marketing and Outreach Department. After I successfully started that department, I had an opportunity to go into consulting, which was really kind of fun for me to do because it gave me the ultimate freedom of picking who I wanted to work with and picking the projects that I wanted to work on. Luckily, during the early part of my career, I was able to establish a financial foundation that gave me more freedom to consider all my options. I think it's important for young people to understand the importance of a financial foundation. In other words, it's one thing to job hop for a higher salary, but if you don't accumulate some basic wealth in terms of pension, 401k, it becomes a constraint later on in life. I asked David about owning your career, and he talked about that. I also asked him about taking risk in your career. And here's what he had to say. The old cliche of taking risk is obviously important, but it's also measuring the risk and knowing what the upside and downside is. More importantly, know who's in your corner when you decide to take a risk. We want to underline that. That's important right there. Know who's in your corner. For me, there have been calculated risk and missed opportunities, no doubt. That said, I think it relates to understanding the culture and the environment that you're in, because you have to first understand what the appetite for risk is. And quite honestly, at Anheuser-Busch and in the beer industry, there was a significant amount of appetite for risk. I believe that risks taken by minorities and corporations are seen and handled differently than in government or at a nonprofit. But know that if you do take the risk, you have to deliver. You have to deliver, because then when you ask for forgiveness, it's a lot easier to get that rather than, as they say, the opposite, where you ask for permission and they don't understand or they don't believe. There's some times when you have to take a risk, make it happen, and then when you apologize, they say, hey, it was okay. I just remember fondly the conversation. Let me wrap up. There's more to David's story in The Power of Owning Your Career book, and certainly you can pick up the book. It's on Amazon and other places online that you purchase books. We also have it on the Simone Morris Enterprises shop on the website. I want to wrap up my tribute to David by reading what he said about his formula for owning his career was. I don't know if there's a one formula that works, but let me suggest what my takeaways are. Number one, it's the depth and quality of the relationships that you develop. I had to develop a significant amount of trust for Anheuser-Busch to peel off $1 million in their budget for me, but he delivered on outcomes that made others look good. I didn't have to take credit. I gave them full credit. But you do that enough and people understand that there is someone behind the scenes making this happen. Secondly, education, helping those folks understand that the multicultural business opportunities, whether it's through outreach or marketing, is not an either or proposition. And let's face it, America is changing. Demographics are changing. And for corporations, they're less concerned about the color of the person who buys the beer as long as the beer is being sold. They look for expertise. They look for the best way to do this. So David talked about education. Simone personally believes that education is a game changer, and a strong commitment to lifelong learning is important for you to plant seeds in yourself that will bloom when you need them to bloom. Because as Malcolm Gladwell talked about those 10,000 hours to become an expert, it's important to not just get to a place where you stop learning. So you constantly have to be looking out there for new information of what's happening in your field, new information of how you become a transformational leader. And you need to carve out the time to work on your professional development, because that's important. And trust me, you can get to a point where you have so many work priorities that you're putting lower and lower and lower on your list, professional development. And I know, again, because I did that for so long, but I regret doing that. And now I'm intentional where when I make a weekly plan of what I'm going to focus on for the week, one of the columns, I do have this little um, PowerPoint document that lays out the week and what I'm doing, what are my priorities. And one of them is professional development, where I could be watching a webinar, I could be going to an event to pick up more education, I could be reading a book. The point is, I am filling my tank with knowledge that I can then regurgitate or use in my work or use in how I show up as a leader. So I want you to keep that in mind and think about one thing that you want to do this week to take ownership of your career. What will it be? For me, it's really getting a handle on my calendar and making sure that I hold the commitments that I make in terms of education for myself, in terms of getting out of the office, because sometimes it can seem like you can't get out of the office, you can't get away, but the education is there. And so I'm a believer that we are learning who we are along the way, and exposure to different people, different experiences, new knowledge, things that challenge us allows us to grow. And also we really have to, I like to say, Simone likes to say, hone in on those three things that I always talk about. If you listen to other podcast episode, I talk about the plan, the importance of having a career plan, the importance of really working your plan, on delivering on your plan, but also promoting your career brand, being very intentional about building up that brand. My company's name is Simone Morris Enterprises, and that's a brand in itself that's around authenticity. It's around inclusive leadership. It's also around career empowerment. So know your brand, know your strengths, and incorporate that into your brand. And then the other thing is I talked about the plan. I also want to talk about partners. And David talked about that in his message in the Power of Owning Your Career book. Relationships, I'm finding, are so key. Right now, I'm working on this Inclusive Leadership Impact Awards, and I'm so grateful for the relationships that I've formed throughout my career. And I'm putting myself out there by asking people to support me. And I think sometimes we have to challenge our mindset and belief system around asking for help. Because if you're trained to get things done on your own and to double down and get it done, you can do that and you can miss out on some amazing opportunities or allowances for people to help you. I remember, shout out to Alan DeVille. I always say this because I went to Stryker Corporation in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and I used to work with Alan many, many years ago at Diageo. And he read my book and then said, Simone, did you tell anyone how you were feeling? And Alan, if you're listening to this episode, I don't know if you are, but anyway, that had a great impact on me because I was fearful of telling people what I wanted or how I was feeling, where I was in a place of unhappiness with moving ahead. And I just had an expectation that things would happen for me based on the work that I was doing. I did not understand the power of relationships and asking those relationships to really pour back into you and help you out. So that's one of the key lessons that I took from my experience in corporate. I continue to learn today, learn and grow. And I learned so much from the late David Kim. David, I miss you. I miss knowing that I could send you an email and knowing that you would thoughtfully respond. I hope your family is doing well. And this is my tribute to you and my way of saying thank you for being a kind leader, an inspirational leader, willing to share his knowledge freely. You were just such a stand-up human being, and you left an impact on Simone Morris. This is Simone Morris for this episode, this Real Talk episode, long overdue. I wanted to honor David Kim because he really, like I said, was a great human being. So that's it for this week, the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I know that this season you haven't heard from me as much. You've heard me in the interviews, but in terms of a real talk episode where Simone just sits down and is talking about career ownership, and if you want to connect with me, you can also always do that. I do a complimentary career conversation, where you can talk to me about what's happening in your career and see if we are a good fit to work together in a coaching capacity. In order to take advantage of that complimentary session, it's 30 minutes. You can go to the website, careerbreakthroughcall.com. We'll put it in the show notes. All this information we'll put in the show notes so that you can have that at your fingertips. But thank you. We are on season 11. Thank you for listening to the podcast. We will be back next week with another fabulous guest. Not that I'm not fabulous, I feel fabulous, but I am excited to be with you and to share about the podcast, the growth, and to be real and talk about what inspires and motivates me. And David Kim was one of those people who inspired and motivated me. And so, David, rest in peace. You made an impact. You made a difference.
I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this week's empowering career story on the podcast. If you did, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Wherever you listen to the podcast, be sure that you are subscribing and that you rate and review the podcast. It's so important as we continue to spread the word of career empowerment. In addition, you can head over to the LinkedIn platform and join the Power of Owning Your Career discussion group. There you can have access to the guests who have been on the podcast, as well as others listening to the podcast, as well as myself, where we can continue the conversation. I hope to see you on that platform. You can also email me at pooyc@simonemorris.com if you have a suggestion for guest or a message that you want me to hear personally. Thanks so much, and make it an inspiring, empowering week in your career.